Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to build and stretch a canvas because it's not actually as hard as you think. So let's get started. So we're going to start with building the frame, and to do that I am going to use these 2x2s for the frame itself and then these 1x2s for the braces. If you have a table saw, I highly recommend cutting these down from a 2x4. I don't have a table saw, so I found the straightest 2x2s I could find, which is easier said than done, and I'm going to use those. But cutting them yourself will save you a buck or two. The canvas that I want to make is going to be 4 feet by 5 feet. And the first thing I'm going to do is cut these 2x2s with mitered edges. Now, if I had a miter saw, I would use that, but I don't. So I'm going to use a square and a circular saw, but you are going to use your miter saw. Don't be like me. Okay, now that I have the frame built, I'm going to cut a brace to go across the middle and on each corner. But I'm going to do that with a 1x2 instead of the 2x2s. And the reason I'm going to do that is so that when I stretch the canvas and paint on top of it, it won't hit the braces because they'll sit a little bit shallower than the frame. To screw this all together, I'm going to use a combination of 3-inch construction screws and these 2.5-inch trim head screws. And of course, I'm going to pre-drill everything with a countersink bit. So when I attach the corners, I'm going to use the 3-inch screws, and in order for them not to run into each other, I'm going to put one on each side, one on the top, and then one on the bottom. That way I'll leave enough clearance for both screws, and the tension will be pulled from both sides of the corner. After I built the 4 sides of the frame, I went in and attached all of the brace pieces with the trim head screws. So now that we have the frame built, I am going to just go in and sand down these edges. The reason for that is the same that I made these shallower than this part. It's because when I put the canvas on, I don't want the paint to pick up this hard edge. To do this, I'm going to use a sander because I don't have a router or a table saw, but if you did want to use a router, you could use a round over bit to make something kind of like this, or you could bevel your edges before you put the frame together by using a table saw so it looks something like this. But I'm just going to use a sander. And that is the completed frame. The next step is to stretch the canvas. You can really use whatever type of material you want. You can buy a nice canvas from the art store, you can use linen, whatever your preference is. I'm going to use a canvas drop cloth that I bought at the hardware store because it's cheap, and I'm kind of just using these canvases to play around. The canvas that I bought is around 30 bucks and it's 9 feet by 12 feet. The one thing you want to keep in mind is there might be some imperfections in something as cost effective as this, and sometimes they come with seams in them. So before you build your canvas, you want to make sure that your canvas doesn't have any seams if you want it to be really big. So let's talk about grain for a minute. So most canvases are going to be a flat weave, and I realized it would just be easier to draw it for you. So a flat weave or a plain weave really just means that the warp and weft of your fabric, meaning the vertical and horizontal strings, are just going back and forth, and there's nothing fancy happening with the weave. If you look close to a piece of canvas, you can actually see that the strings are just going vertically and horizontally. And it's the direction of these strings that will make up the grain of the fabric. When we go to stretch our canvas, we want to make sure that we lay the frame on top of the fabric in line with the direction of the grain, not on a diagonal. That way, we'll get an even tension on both sides when we staple. I started by laying out my canvas and then putting the frame on top. Once I had the frame down, I went around and trimmed about a 5-inch allowance of canvas around each side. Definitely made sure to double check that my grain was running in the same direction. And the nice thing about working with a plain weave like this is that you can usually just cut a notch and rip in a straight line because it'll rip along with the grain of the fabric. Just a note that this only works in one direction, not both, for these canvas drop cloths. That's why I'm cutting this other side. Whenever I stretch a canvas, I always like to start on the long side and one staple on each side, just to start the tension off correctly. Then I'm going to work towards each corner, putting a staple in every 6 inches until I'm about a foot short of the corner. Once I was done with the long sides, I repeated the same steps on the shorter sides. Once I was done with all 4 sides, it's time to do the corners, which is probably the most intimidating part, but we're really just going to make little hospital corners to make it neat and even. You can see that I'm folding that inner piece of fabric into a little triangle and wrapping the outside piece of canvas so that it creates a nice smooth fold. Now that we have our canvas stretched over the frame, it's time to prime it or gesso it. Gesso is just a fancy word for priming. What it's going to do is when we put it on the canvas, it will actually shrink the fibers so that they stretch even tighter, and it'll give us a nice tight surface to paint on. I am using Liquitex acrylic gesso in white. They also make it in clear and black, or you can tint it if you're interested in doing that. And I just used a large chip brush to spread it around, although I would not recommend this because a lot of the bristles came out in the gesso as I was working. After I left the gesso to dry, I went back in and trimmed the back excess canvas off to leave me with a nice-ish finished edge. That's how I stretch my canvases, and now they're ready to paint. And just for fun, I did do a little cost breakdown of how much I saved on making these canvases. To buy 2 canvases of similar size from an art store, pre-primed and stretched, would have cost me around $250. But I was able to make both of these for about half as much at $125. So whether you're interested in stretching your own custom size canvas or just saving a little bit of money, I definitely recommend this project for anyone who's into painting. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more, be sure to let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time!